Hare Krishna. Welcome to Thriving Bhakti. Badra Sane here. Today's session is about the modes of nature, are all about how we have certain types of thinking. So someone in the different modes has different types of thinking. And this is linked to why we have trouble with our commitments and vows. Commitments to our habits, like hearing and chanting. This is why we have issues in any area of our life, actually. All the struggles are because we're influenced by the different modes. And as you know, in Thriving Bhakti, we make it really simple using down to earth, normal kind of language, everyday language, and concepts to help us become the thriving bhaktas and sadhakas that we want to be. And we're openly honest and transparent that we all have our struggles, and it's about addressing them and understanding the root cause is our thinking. So why do we have trouble with commitments? Well, let's think of the type of thinking that's been going on over the last 60 years, right? So in society, in the Western world, the thinking is that if I have the right, this infantile assumption that the purpose of life is hedonistic enjoyment. I have the right to enjoy and be happy. I should be happy, right? This is a type of thinking that's gone on since the 60s, 70s, and 80s, that intergenerational that mindset has gone on intergenerationally, handed down, that somehow we're entitled and should have the right to just do whatever we want, whenever, however we want. Remember in the 60s, free love, free this, no restrictions, anti-disestablishment, anti-institution. You see that so prevalent decade after decade. The idea that we should have unrestricted sense gratification. So we hear this in the Shastra, we hear this in Bhagavatam, and Bhagavad Gita, and all the books that we read in Krishna consciousness. But try to see how that mindset has been there. And we have grown up. All of us in the Krishna consciousness movement, even from the very beginning, most of us came from that ideology, that perception or type of thinking, that I should just be happy. And you can see that right up to today, that we wake up and we feel I have the right to party. I have the right to have hedonistic enjoyment. I should just be unrestricted in what I do. And that type of thinking, you see, we carry with us when we come into bhakti, right? And we're wondering why we have problems with commitments, why we have struggles dealing with the issues with balancing our lives, our work, family life with our sadhana, keeping our vows and doing our chanting qualitatively and quantitatively. So this podcast is going to be extremely useful for any of you out there who I call the struggling and overwhelmed bhaktas who wish to move forward in life and break out of any kind of stuckness or struggles that they have. So try to see what is behind that type of thinking, which is called lower modal thinking. It's basically passion and ignorance, of course. But let's just talk normally. What's behind this idea that I should have this it's like a 2-year-old, isn't it? It's 2-year-old mentality that's been going on decade after decade, that I should just be happy. My parents should just make me happy. Like, remember a 2-year-old, right? It just has the assumption that it should get everything it wants when it wants, however it wants, right? Imagine raising a child and you just gave it whatever you want, whenever it wanted, every time it screamed and kicked and moaned. And if it didn't get those things, it was unhappy. And somehow or other, you just gave in to that. What type of child would you produce? And you know that as soon as you give the child the thing it actually is kicking and screaming and think it has the right to have, I want that sweet, I want that toy, I want this, I want that. If you give the child those things, what happens? The child is immediately unhappy from one moment to the next. That instant feeling of that gratification, that idea that I should have hedonistic enjoyment at any moment, it doesn't satisfy, does it? You see, mode of goodness, and this is a shock to even devotees when and I see this even in Krishna consciousness in our communities, that we're actually the adventure in life, the adventure in your life, materially or spiritually, is to be found in your responsibilities. What a horrible word, isn't it? That's why it says mode of goodness is poison in the beginning, nectar at the end. So let's break that down into just like, where am I at? It means try to see within us is this rebellion, this idea that I have to be responsible. Even in Krishna consciousness, we can see that when they get into marriage or we get into services and stuff, we just want to be left alone. Just let me get on with my service, Prabhu. I don't want to be responsible to anyone or accountable to anyone. Just, we're just free spirits, right? No, 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 no. This is the same wrong thinking that comes from those lower modes that has been predominant in Western societies. We've been lied to and we've mistaken that we think that to be happy, I need to satisfy myself. But actually, happiness comes in the struggle of taking up responsibility. That's why I take my hat off to any devotees who have taken positions to try to take responsibility for pushing on this movement. Parents who have families that have stayed together through thick and thin, who realize this is not a place of hedonistic enjoyment where I'm supposed to be happy. It's my adventure and meaning comes from the struggle of taking up responsibilities. Getting devotees married and having children and staying together through thick and thin as a responsibility is where you find meaning and transformation. Unfortunately, we don't have a great record in marriages in our society. And that's due to the stinking thinking that carries into our Krishna consciousness. And we think it's all just the Krishna conscious issue. But it's actually just that thinking that is wrong. We have to understand that it's in the difficulty that we find meaning. It's carrying the cross up the hill, so to speak, using a Christian analogy, that we find meaning and purpose. This is so against the grain of how we're programmed in society. And we see this material. This is mode of goodness. This is mode of goodness. This is just a higher material platform of existence. But we have to come to the mode of goodness to practice bhakti properly. We can't just, the idea, well, I'm doing my sadhana, I'm chanting, but I don't want any responsibility. I don't want to be accountable. I certainly don't want any feedback. No, responsibility is key. We must take up responsibility for others. And of course, that includes the brahmachari ashram and the grihastha ashram. The brahmachari ashram isn't about just living an easy life, not taking up responsibility. Of course, it's an easier life economically. It's a simpler life, but there's not an excuse not to be responsible for others, to take up responsibility. Of course, you're taking up the responsibility of the orders of your spiritual master, and you're taking responsibility to execute his order. It's not a, but see how behind us is this tendency to I just want to be left alone. When I take responsibility for others, I just get into challenging situations and communications and misunderstandings. I'm going to avoid it. How many of us, honestly, hand on heart, we don't really like dealing too deeply with challenging situations with others, whether they're in our work or in the devotional community? Because when you deal with people, you've got to act in character, you've got to maintain composure, and you have to act responsibly for the greater mission. So pick up the cross and go up the hill. That's where meaning is to be found. It's not in hedonistic madness. Even in Krishna consciousness, it's not about selfish Krishna consciousness of no responsibility, just taking care of yourself. That is not going to create transformation and meaning long term. It won't satisfy your 2-year-old if you simply allow the 2-year-old to enjoy himself unrestrictedly with instant gratification. Immediately the child is unhappy again and wants more, kicking and fussing. So we try to teach our children to be responsible. And look at some of the parenting I see in our society and outside. We've taken on board the idea that we should be friends with our kids, that they should be happy all the time, that we should please them. We just have to make them happy, treat them like a king. No, we need to teach our children how to be responsible. No matter how uncomfortable that is, long term, they're going to be challenged and they're going to struggle in life to keep commitments and to do things out of responsibility if you don't train them when they're young. So we see this. Society has taught adults, all of us coming from those backgrounds, most of us maybe, or on listening, or you can observe if you haven't come from those kinds of backgrounds, that we have gone through decades that being irresponsible, having no restriction, just feeling free to be spiritual in my own way. Okay, I'm in Bhakti, but kind of let me do it my own way. This is not going to ultimately, we're not going to mature very fast. You see, getting what you want immediately, you see, is not going to help us. What we think is what I want right now is I should be happy. I want it right now. I want to be happy now in Krishna consciousness. Why isn't Krishna making me happy? We're trying to be enjoyers in Krishna consciousness. It's a very subtle point. We at least have to be in the mode of goodness and do things out of responsibility and duty. And that really, I struggled with this one for years. Wow, how can I be happy in Krishna consciousness if I just do it out of duty and commitment? But what about my happiness? That point always comes back into the equation. What about me? What about how am I going to be happy? But even materially, you can't be happy if you just think of yourself and your own selfish happiness. So we have to contend and be very reflective devotees, progressive devotees, conscious devotees, become conscious and Krishna conscious, to see this within our desires, within our subtle body, our subtle desires. And we have to challenge and change that way of seeing the world. And we change the way we see the world by addressing our thinking. This is the subtle. This is for those who want to go to the mature levels of bhakti in terms of getting over the gross elements of the regulated principles and following, but to getting into your subtle area, like the second cleaning of the Konditcha temple. There was 2 sessions of cleaning that happened. And the second one represents getting into the subtle desires that Bhaktivinoda Thakur and the Acharyas get into, getting behind these subtle things for fame, acquisition, center of attention. Yeah, these subtle desires, right? These are acquisitions, but they're subtle. I want to be noticed. I want to be the center. So the mode of goodness is it is for us coming from those backgrounds with that thinking, it's kind of poison in the beginning because it goes against the grain of what we thought was the way to be happy. And we won't accept it, and we won't accept the mode of goodness fully unless we understand and think in the mode of goodness. Yeah? Because many of us shy from responsibility, right? We see the breakups within our society in marriages. I'm not happy anymore. We don't find meaning in the struggle. We can't see the responsibility is the shouldering of the responsibility is where we find the meaning and purpose and fulfillment, is in the struggle. And the struggle is an opportunity for the greatest transformation. It's when we run away from those struggles and we bail out, we lose the opportunity to make progress. Because in the back of our minds, one of the reasons is because we fail to think and understand, and because we think still in that old lower modal way that somehow I should be happy. I shouldn't have to be responsible. In fact, Krishna consciousness and spiritual life is about unloading material responsibility. Yeah, that's it. I'm just going to do the absolute minimum responsibilities and just chant. No. We have responsibilities. And those responsibilities are part of the purification. A part of shouldering those responsibilities creates the transformation to change our hearts and our minds, and our hearts and minds are linked together. When our thinking is right, our heart is right, and that creates the transformation. We have difficulties when we have So if you have struggles with your sadhana, with your reading, with your relationships, with services, or whatever it is in any platform of your life, material or spiritual, you got to address your thinking. You got to see what are my responsibilities am I shying away from here? And if I can think in the mode of goodness, then if I can think correctly, then I can address the issue. So commitments that we have and the struggles we have stem from our thinking. And then today I just wanted to get you to think about that. There's a nice quote I have here that is really important, because when we have that hedonistic sense of I should be the enjoyer, I should be happy, what about me? Like the 2-year-old child. Yeah, what about you? um, we need to address the there are feelings that come with that thinking. So thinking, feeling, willing. So when you think in that way, well, I should be happy, there's a feeling of righteousness, there's a feeling that goes with it, and those feelings become our justification. Don't you understand how that makes me feel when you make me? So being responsible for things and taking up responsibility doesn't necessarily feel good all the time for the false ego, right? So why am I saying this? Because why are you taking your feelings so seriously? No one, even a successful materialist, does not make decisions and move their life forward based on how they feel, because feelings change all the time. Yeah. So here's a quote. Being a man or a woman, a mature bhakti yogi, is doing what you said you were going to do long after the feeling to do it is gone. When you get excited, I'm going to get initiated, I'm going to do my vows. Yeah, I'm excited. It's going to be amazing. And then the feeling of the event and the ceremony has gone. What are you going to do? See, when those feelings come up, when you're doing it out of responsibility and commitment, and it's not giving you any enjoyment you think bhakti should be giving you, that you should be happy. Those feelings then will, oh, well, maybe the chanting doesn't work. You start being less committed to your vows and your reading and situation. Your circumstances are making you feel that you can't cope or get out of the situation, that no one understands. And that will justify what? That will justify reducing or not committing to your vows and your habits. But if your thinking is correct, mode of goodness, actually, I have a responsibility to chant my rounds and to read for my own responsibility, for myself as a spirit soul, to my future that I want, my better future, material and spiritual ultimately. And I have a duty and responsibility to my family and friends and those who I have helped along the way, persons I've helped. I have to lead. I cannot be irresponsible, lead people and not be responsible myself. 3, to your family and even your material family and friends who will benefit from your bhakti. You have a responsibility to them. That's your meaning and purpose, you see. You're more than just you have a responsibility and impact on others, even those who aren't even physically present. Generations of your family and will be benefited. And of course, you have a responsibility to the world and other living entities, right, to help them. And you can't help them become Krishna conscious if you're not. So we've got to find our meaning in our responsibility, which means we need to be thinking in the mode of goodness. So I hope this was useful in getting us to think deeply about how we're coming in with a certain type of stinking thinking, in the idea of the right for this infantile assumption that the purpose of life is for me to be happy and have a life of irresponsibility. And when it comes to bhakti, we shouldn't have institutions or ISKCON or be responsible to anyone. We should just be free spirits. This is the same materialistic, lower modal thinking. We should shoulder responsibilities, accept those responsibilities, not take our feelings seriously, and man up, woman up, and take up the cross and come out of the struggle and fix our sadhana reading, our services, our relationships, our practices of bhakti, our habits, and find that the adventure in our life will be found in our responsibilities. And know that that is not unique to bhakti. That is in material life or spiritual life. But ultimately, of course, our responsibilities are to please the spiritual master. And those responsibilities have the power to transcend even the mode of goodness. But we're just getting into the basics today. So I want you to go away and think about, why are you having troubles with your commitments? And address the thinking. Try to see how you're thinking about it. And if you can address that, then you can overcome, you can move forward, and you can find a way out, and you'll free yourself and go to another level. So please make any comments below if you like this podcast, and and please subscribe, and I'll look forward to speaking again. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.